Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm very excited to welcome you to FAN's final event of our 40th anniversary season, a conversation between Christian Cooper and Natalie Moore. Thanks for joining us. On behalf of FAN, I wish to thank the thousands of individuals from across the globe who have attended both our virtual and in-person events this season. Your enthusiasm for our programming fuels our growth. Many thanks to our dozens of sponsors and partners who collaborate with us to shape our content, and a bow of gratitude to all who have funded our work during this year-long anniversary celebration. We feel your love and are boosted by your confidence in our mission. We have nearly 300 videos of past events archived on our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Christian Cooper is a science and comics writer and editor, and the host and consulting producer of Extraordinary Birder on National Geographic. His new book is Better Living Through Birding, Notes from a Black Man in the Natural World, and it's being released tomorrow. Christian was one of Marvel Comics' first openly gay writers and editors, and introduced the first gay male character in the Star Trek Starfleet Academy series, which was nominated for a GLAAD Media Award. He also introduced the first openly lesbian character for Marvel and created and authored Queer Nation, the online gay comic. Natalie Moore is an award-winning journalist based in Chicago whose enterprise reporting for WBEZ tackles race, housing, economic development, food injustice, violence, segregation, and inequality. Her most recent book is The Billboard, a play about abortion, published by Haymarket Books. Her acclaimed book, The South Side, a portrait of Chicago and American segregation, received the 2016 Chicago Review of Books Award for Nonfiction and was BuzzFeed's Best Nonfiction Book of 2016. Ms. Moore has interviewed Ta-Nehisi Coates, Jesmyn Ward, Thomas Fisher, and Austin Channing Brown for FAN, and we're grateful for her engagement with our programming. And now, with no further ado, let's welcome Christian Cooper and Natalie Moore to FAN.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for that introduction, Lonnie and Christian. Happy Pub Date Eve.
Thank you very much, Natalie.
How's it feeling?
It's a little weird and overwhelming in many respects, but I'm just trying to roll with it and stay grounded and see what happens.
Okay, well, I have to tell you, on the way home from picking my daughter up from camp, we pulled up in front of our house and I saw a cardinal on our porch. And the cardinal is Illinois state bird. It's the only, that's probably the extent of my birding knowledge, is learning that from school. Like, this is our state bird, and you don't see cardinals a lot. And my daughter asked, is this a rare bird? And I told her, I don't think so. But since we're in Illinois, what can you tell us about the cardinal? Is that rare?
Well, the cardinal is actually a very interesting species because it used to be much more restricted to the South. And if you look, a lot of the southern states have the cardinal as their state bird. In my home state of New York, here we have cardinals all over the place. But if you go back to just to the 1920s, cardinals were actually quite uncommon to rare in New York. And it is a bird that has been able to successfully expand its range further and further north. Is it because of global warming? It's hard to say. I think probably in this case, not so much. It's probably other factors that helped it expand its range, like the increased use of bird feeders. But it has definitely spread from the South. In fact, this is one of the things that happens when you're a birder and you go to the movies. You notice all kinds of kooky things. But I remember seeing the movie Sleepy Hollow, and the character of whatever, I forget the name of the woman character, but she's like, oh, this is my favorite bird, and she's got the picture of a cardinal. And this is in New York State before the revolution. I'm like, nah, she wouldn't have even seen a cardinal back then. So yeah, it's an interesting species in that regard.
Are they always red?
The males are red, the females are a sort of beige brown, and the immature birds are a beige brown. But the males tend to be very, very red. Though they're not the reddest of our birds. We actually have birds that are even redder than that, if you can believe it. So,
Well, I figured that cardinal showing up right before we do this talk was a sign for birding. I want to say that you are so much more than the Central Park incident with Amy Cooper. And I know that that's probably what people are going to lead with. I guess that's what I'm doing in a backwards way. But I don't want to talk about that now. But because you have had such a fascinating life and journey and travelogue, I'm excited to talk about your lessons in birding and your various travels. But if you could tell the audience, who are you? Who are your people?
Who are my people? Wow. I guess the people who I have an innate affinity for are the groups I identify with, which is African Americans and Black people more broadly across the globe, and queer people, because those are the two groups that I belong to, that have a claim on me and my consciousness, but also they're the two groups through which I've experienced oppression. That word maybe oversells it. I mean, it is oppression, but discrimination, angst, anxiety, a better word, marginalization, through those two groups. So that tends to make you identify with that group. And so those are the two groups that I have the strongest affinity for. But and then nerds, because I'm a nerd. And I make no bones about it. I can, quote you certain issues of X-Men practically word for word, rattle off the opening preamble to Dark Shadows, the old supernatural soap opera from the 1960s and 1970s, because I grew up watching it. It's just all this stuff is planted in my consciousness. And Star Trek, forget it. I can identify a Star Trek episode, original Star Trek, usually within less than 30 seconds. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about how you discovered birding. You were a queer kid who didn't feel like you had anyone to talk to, and these Star Trek references go way back. You talk about having these Vulcan emotions. So tell us why birding literally and figuratively spoke to you.
Birding was a way for me to get outside of myself because, knowing that I was queer at a very early age, I knew when I was about 5 years old. So knowing at that age, and somehow knowing, just picking up from the cues in the world around me, that this was something that I could not and should not talk about if I wanted to get by in the world I lived in then, which was late 60s through all of the 70s on Long Island, which can be a very conservative place. So I knew that to survive, I had to keep all that locked away. And so that really sort of made my young life very difficult, very painful. And birding was a way to sort of leave all that behind, because what birding does is it takes you outside of yourself and forces you to focus on a much larger world full of amazing, wonderful things that you're just starting to piece together. And when you've pieced one piece of it together, there's another mystery in the natural world that gets revealed to you, and another and more questions. And it just opens up so much. And in experiencing that, your myopic world and woes just kind of fall away. It's one reason why I wish, and I'm trying to get more Black people out there birding, because I think we need that healing power of being out in nature, of getting outside of yourself and immersing yourself in the natural world. It is restorative, it is healing. And I think we as a people need that probably more than many other folk, just because of our experiences in this country, in the past and today. So.
And you break that down in a way. I mean, clearly, I don't know anything about birding, so I'm asking you the most elementary questions about cardinals here.
No, that's fine.
But you talk about what captivates you, and it's the listening and what makes birds unique animals or creatures compared to others? What is it about? So it's restorative, it's all these things, but what is it about birds?
Sure. So that's the restorative part is the experience of going birding, of being out in nature. What is it about birds specifically? Well, first of all, you got to remember they're dinosaurs. They're not just related to dinosaurs. They are living dinosaurs, the only dinosaurs that survived the big extinction at the end of the Cretaceous period. So every time you look at a pigeon, you are seeing like the nearest living thing to a Tyrannosaurus Rex, because they're actually in the same family of dinosaurs as Tyrannosaurus Rex. That in and of itself makes them impossibly cool. But what birds have is something that our pets don't have. Our pets, dogs or cats, their primary sense is their nose. They smell things. Our primary senses are our eyes and our ears. Those are the same primary senses that birds use. They are communicating through impossible colors in their plumage and bold patterns and incredible sounds that they make. The songs of songbirds are just gorgeous and varied, and across some of them so high pitched we can't even hear them. So we have the same tools to appreciate birds as the birds have to appreciate themselves. So that makes birding incredibly attractive. But the other thing about birds is that they just capture our imagination because they can fly. They can launch themselves into the air and there are no limits for them. They can move in any direction. They just think it and they move up and down. There is no part of the globe that is not connected by the sky, so they can go literally anywhere. And then even underneath the water, you find birds, with penguins swimming underneath the water and birds like gannets that dive into the ocean to catch their prey. So birds are the ultimate symbol of freedom. And that is a very romantic, exhilarating idea.
And who introduced you to birding?
It's very interesting. My dad was a science teacher. So in our household, nature was always very important. But it wasn't birds in particular. That was sort of my own thing, my own sort of quirk that happened along the way. In birding, we talk about your spark bird. That's a term that means the bird that got you started birding, the bird that caught your attention, and then you got pulled in to the whole birding scene because of that. For me, my spark bird is a bird called the red wing blackbird. You have them, in all over Illinois. We have them in New York. And the first time I saw one at a bird feeder, I was like, oh, look at that crow with red in the wings. I've discovered a new species of crow. And I was all excited that I had scored this preteen triumph of science. And then, of course, I found out they were red-winged blackbirds. And no, I hadn't discovered a new species, but they remain to this day one of my favorite birds. And their very raucous cry, their song is my first sign of spring to this day, because the males go away in the wintertime. And they're much more reliable than robins, because some robins will winter over. They're much more reliable, much less reliable than red-winged blackbirds, who will come back one day and suddenly you hear that song and you're like, spring's here. So I love that bird. That's how I got started. And then it sort of snowballed from there.
And I found myself Googling all these birds as you described them. So, because I had my imagination, I didn't know what they look like.
Oh,
And
yeah, no, the birds are just incredible. They come in so many patterns. Once you start paying attention to them, you really can't stop.
And there was a bird that I don't think it was you. That's maybe it was you, that someone, a birding expert, thought that this was an ugly bird. And then there was a young person who was like, this is so cool. This is beautiful.
No, that was me.
Okay.
It's a bird that's quite common. It's actually related to the red-winged blackbird. It's in the blackbird family. And even its name sounds ugly. It's called a common. So right there, you're saying, it's not such a big deal. It's called a common grackle. Even the name sounds like, spackle or something like that, you're going to repair a house with. So a common grackle, and it's, mostly dark and, kind of loud. And you see so many of them, after a while you take it for granted. And so I like to try to encourage kids to go out there and appreciate the birds. So I'm here in New York. I'm always, working with the public schools, getting kids outside of the concrete in the neighborhoods and getting them into the parks and nature. And I was hoping to find a cardinal for them because I'm like, yeah, that's a knock your socks off bird for these kids. And I wasn't finding anything. And finally, one of the kids goes, "What's that?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's a grackle." He even said it like I was like clearing my throat. "That's a grackle." And he said, "It's beautiful." And I was like, "What? Wait, what?" And then I looked at it and I thought about it and I realized I had become jaded in my old age. And I'm like, he's absolutely right. Because the bird, besides just
It's like an ebony rich
it's got
color.
iridescence. It's got this shimmer, the sheen. Like, when you see on an oil slick, it looks dark, but then there's all these colors playing across the top. That's what the grackle has. It's got this iridescence, this shimmer, sheen of greens and purples. It's got this huge big tail that when it flies kind of creases to form a V. It's got these bright yellow eyes. It's really gorgeous. And I had to relearn that. And that's one of the wonderful things actually about going birding with kids, with students, is that you get to bird as if for the first time all over again. And it really sort of rejuvenates yourself and your birding. So that was a great experience.
So the name of your book is Better Living Through Birding. And throughout the chapters, you have these tips intertwined about better living. And I don't want you to go through all of them. We don't have enough time. But if you could talk about some of the pleasures of birding that translate into living a better life.
So a little bit of background. I've become most obsessive about my birding during the spring migration. That's when the males are in their most beautiful plumage and they're singing away, and it's the time to be out there just birding 24/7, which is what I'm doing for the most part. I might have to stop to go to work for a little while, gosh darn it. But other than that, I'm in the park at the crack of dawn, and my friends were giving me so much flack about the fact that they don't see me during spring migration. For about 6 weeks, they just don't see me. And then finally I was sick of it. And I'm like, you know what? This is why I do it. There are 7 reasons, 7 pleasures to birding. And I just sort of codified them and rattled them off. So I'm not going to go through them all here. They are all in the book, but the one I want to talk about is probably the most interesting. And it's the one I lead off the book with, which is what I call the unicorn effect. Because if you've been birding for even a short amount of time, you become familiar with some birds, even though you've never seen them. You'll see them in a book or you'll see them in a magazine and you're like, oh my God, that's beautiful. Like the cardinal. I remember when I was a kid, the cardinal, I had only seen it in books. And then one day I went to the backyard and I heard the sound and I looked up, and perched on the TV antenna, because we had TV antennas back then, perched on the TV antenna of our house was this cardinal, red with this red crest, singing away. And it was as if this mythological creature that up until then had only existed in my imagination had come to life. It's a knock your socks off experience. It's a thrill that I haven't found anything else that duplicates it. It's sort of like if you woke up in the morning and walked out into your backyard and found a tiger prowling around in your backyard. It's that kind of thrill, maybe without the potential threat of death, a tiger, but it's an incredible experience. So that's probably the 7th and ultimate pleasure of birding, is that unicorn effect, as I call it.
One question we got ahead of time, and it's coming up in the questions, and people are chomping at the bit. So I think I should ask it now. Okay. How does one in an urban area begin birding?
By just opening up your eyes and ears to what's around you. You would be amazed what's around in an urban area. Good example. I live in the middle of Manhattan, all right? So it's a sea of concrete here. I go up to my roof one day and I look 2 roofs over and there's a red-tailed hawk, big old hawk, sitting there on 2 roofs down. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Then I hear this click, 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 click. I know right away what it is. It's an American kestrel, our smallest falcon, but there's 2 of them. and they are not having this red-tailed hawk in their neighborhood. So they're taking turns dive bombing it, kind of like tag team wrestling. One goes at it and then another goes at it. And the poor red-tailed hawk is there like, he's like many times their size, but he's just sitting there going, and then all of a sudden the kestrels stop. And I hear, cack, 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 and I look up and there's a peregrine falcon, our biggest falcon, comes swooping down, and he starts swooping at the poor red tail. It's like, oh. And now at this point, the kestrels are sitting on a roof on the other side of the street going, we're not getting involved in this. We're sitting this one out now. And this is all happening on a rooftop in the middle of Manhattan, and nobody knows it except for me up on my roof. You know, people down on the street are clueless. So there are things going on around you all the time, even in the middle of the city. Amazing things. One thing to remember also in cities, we have rats and we have pigeons. Perfect food supply for raptors like owls, like hawks, like peregrine falcons who love to dine on pigeons. So there's plenty of those birds. There are other birds just about any place you can find a green space. Now, here's a problem for many African Americans, is that our communities tend to be, through history, through built-in socioeconomic factors that have, limited our ability to get forward. Our neighborhoods often do not have access to as many green spaces, don't have as nice parks, don't have as much tree cover. So that's an issue, that's a problem. Doesn't matter, the birds, there will still be birds there. So get out there, open your eyes, open your ears. Binoculars help. They are not mandatory. They are not necessary. And I will say right here and now that I have never bought a pair of binoculars in my life. Despite birding for 50 years, every pair of binoculars I've ever owned were hand-me-downs or gifts. And
even the ones on the cover of the book?
Even the ones on the cover of the book. Those were a 50th birthday gift from my late father. So those are real special to me, and they are my prized binoculars. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so you go outside, just look around, but for people who want knowledge or guidance, do you recommend books, finding a local, like Googling and finding an organization? How does one learn once they go outside?
So for one thing, we all have, our cell phones now. There are free apps from the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology is like the ultimate resource for birds and bird knowledge. And they put out 2 free apps. One is called eBird, and eBird lets you input your own sightings, but also see what other people have sighted and seen in your neighborhood. And then the other app is mind-blowing. It's called Merlin, like the wizard. And what Merlin lets you do, amongst other things, is walk out your door, hold up your phone, and then Merlin will tell you, based on the sounds it picks up, exactly what birds are in your area. Now, that's amazing. It's AI put to good use, and it's getting better all the time as the AI learns. I resent Merlin a little bit because it makes me obsolete. I spent years developing my knowledge base in my ears and the ability to tell the songs apart. But, it is a wonderful tool for people who are just starting out to get a sense of what's around them. So I highly recommend eBird and especially Merlin for beginners. It's a great.
That was a question. I don't know if she's on, but Barbara from Evanston wanted to know, are there ethical uses for that Merlin app with the sound?
I think the bigger question is playback. That's I think what the question is really asking about, which is that, is it legitimate or is it recommended to play back the song of a particular bird? Because what that will do, especially during the breeding season, is it will agitate that bird if it's in the area, if it hears another bird of the same species singing, and it'll come to investigate and try to, chase that rival out of its territory. You don't want to do that. That is largely unethical. I mean, we all do it every once in a blue moon, especially, if you're like in unknown territory, you might do it once or twice. but it's really something you want to avoid because you're disturbing the natural behavior pattern of the bird on its territory. And if there are other birders around, you're probably disturbing other birders, because that I've had that happen to me. I've been in Central Park and I've heard this song and I'm like, ooh, there's a cerulean warbler here, and I go running over and it's somebody playing their phone, and I'm like, okay. So yeah, no, you want to avoid that.
Well, I want to shout out Laura Rutman, who says that you, Christian, are more accurate than Merlin. And she also says, for those who are looking to bird, check out the Audubon Magic Hedge, which is just east of Montrose Harbor, which is fantastic birding.
I have never birded Chicago, and I've heard of the Magic Hedge in Montrose. My Chicago birding friends, especially one, swears by that and says that is the place to go if you can get there. But I don't want to make it seem like you've got to go only to these special places to bird. If you are homebound, you can bird by looking out your window and seeing what comes to your window or passes outside your window. So birding is really open to everyone. The birds belong to no one, but they are there for all of us to enjoy. And in particular, I want to see more of us African Americans enjoying them, because historically we are underrepresented terribly amongst birders. That is happily changing, but it needs to change more. So everybody should start birding more. And in particular, I would love to see more of us African Americans birding more. And that's what I'm hoping my book and my TV show will do. The TV show is Extraordinary Birder. And I think with so many young people in particular, you can only imagine yourself doing something if you see someone like you doing it. So the fact that Extraordinary Birder, probably the first birding show in a long time, if ever, major birding show that's going to be out there in a big way, is going to be led by an African American. That's huge. Hopefully people will look at that, especially youngsters, and think, hey, you know what? That is something Black people do. That is something Black people should be doing more, because we have just as much right to outdoor space and to use outdoor public space as anybody else.
And your show debuts this weekend.
It does. Saturday, June 17th at 10 p.m. Eastern. I don't know what it is Central, if it's adjusted or not. But, check your local listings. It's on Nat Geo Wild cable channel.
Is it a weekly show?
It is weekly, yes. 6 episodes. We go to 6 different locations in each show and explore not just the special birds of that place, but what happens where birds and people interact, for good and for bad. And in particular, we look at the extraordinary birders, because that's really what the title of the show is about. The amazing people doing amazing things to save these birds in their habitats. And I am in awe of what some of these folks do to save the birds. And a lot of them are amateurs and purely volunteer. Some of them are trained ornithologists and biologists and conservationists. It runs the gamut, but they do incredible stuff. And that's what Extraordinary Birder is about.
So as you were growing up, it wasn't just birding that spoke to you. We already mentioned Star Trek, but also comics, superheroes. And so I imagine that the othering of those fictitious worlds and beings must have spoke to you as a queer child.
There's one comic book series in particular called the Uncanny X-Men. And the X-Men were mutants, or are mutants, and because the comic book is huge and still around. And what that means is they were born different from everybody else. And in most cases, you couldn't tell. You just look at them and they look like a normal person. And then sometime around adolescence, suddenly something different about them starts to come to the fore, some strange power and ability. And that, as a queer person, was such a metaphor for the queer experience, where you feel suddenly alienated from everybody else around you, and nobody really knows, and what is this thing that's happening to me, and why am I different, and what am I going to do with that? And that's what the mutants faced. The X-Men used it for heroic purposes, and so X-Men really spoke to me.
You were writing for Marvel before the MCU, before it was the mainstream. I mean, comics have always been a part of the mainstream, but
Well, they've
this was
always
in
been
the,
part of the pop culture. I don't know.
yeah,
They
okay.
were kind of a genre aspect of the pop culture. Now they've taken over the pop culture.
So tell us about your experience working for Marvel, and also you and your editor, I think it was Bobby, who got that queer character in.
Yeah, that was Bobby and the writer of Alpha Flight at the time, a guy named Scott Lobdell, and they decided, look, this character, there've been hints dropped all along, if you've been paying attention, that he's gay. Let's just make it explicit. And of course, I was just the assistant editor there, which basically means head Xeroxer. So, but Bobby had a gay brother. I was gay myself. Scott was happy to do this, and it was in fact his idea, and we're all like, yeah, it's about time. And I remember reading Alpha Flight when I was in college, and after the first couple of issues of Alpha Flight, because it was a relatively new comic book, I was like, North Star is gay. I can tell. The hints are there. So so that's how that came about. And boy, did we not know at the time what a can of worms we were opening, because the stuff really hit the fan when that happened at Marvel. It was a different era. Now,
And what year was that?
That was, excuse me, I want to say 1993, more or less, right around there. I may be off by a year or two. But in particular in comics, because they're perceived, at least in this country, as a juvenile medium, and because anything gay is supposed to be forbidden for children. And we're seeing that rearing its ugly head again today in a big way. The whole anyway, I'll get to that in a second. But because of those two things, that comics are for kids and kids should never hear the word gay, boy, those two things came together to really put us on the hot seat when we did that issue of Alpha Flight and brought the character North Star out of the closet. But you know what? It was done. And as it turns out, looking back, it's like, what was the big deal? The only thing that happened in that issue was that, there's the typical superhero fight where the North Star is punching some villain, and in the middle of one of the punches, he says, "I am gay." That's it. That's all that happens. But it caused such a stir. I remember one shop in Texas sent us a message saying, "From now on, I have to sell Alpha Flight hidden behind a brown paper wrapper." It was like, really? And it's so upsetting, depressing that we're fighting this battle all over again now with, things that are happening in states like Florida, where they're passing all these don't say gay laws, and they say it's to, protect the children. Well, no, because I was a gay kid. So you're not protecting me or kids like me. And they're like, well, it's for parental rights. Well, no, because they're gay parents and you're not respecting their rights. So, it's a lot of double speak just to give cover for the old bigotries to rise up again. And so that's really depressing. How do we get on that subject? Now I'm depressing myself.
Oh, well, okay. But despite all of that, so that happened in 1993. We're seeing all this stuff happening in states, but Marvel, but you have written like out in the open gay characters.
Sure. The one that was most out in the open was for Star Trek Starfleet Academy. And that was a real honor to be able to do that, because that was the first time that any Star Trek anything had ever had a gay human character. They'd had some alien species with maybe weird sexuality of some sort, but they had never had ordinary human people who were gay. And so I was able to do the first one, and that was really a privilege. And I think the story was interesting because I wasn't dogmatic about it. I wasn't trying to I wasn't trying to be political, because it didn't make sense in the Star Trek universe that, we have these terms gay, straight, because, they're really sort of political constructs because of the way our society forces us to be. And in the Star Trek future, they're all just like, yeah, whoever you're dating, whatever. And that's kind of the way I tried to treat it. And then there's one character, because she comes from a different species, where that is taboo because they're going extinct. So non-reproductive romance would be out of the question. Her mind is blown. And so the conflict between those two characters was sort of the crux of the issue. So I thought it was an interesting way to explore that without, sort of getting too dogmatic about it.
So away from birding and comics for a minute. So you do a lot, you talk about a lot of your travels, which are fascinating. And, Costa Rica, lots of birds there, of course. But your trip to Mount Everest, I was like, why did he do this? And, before I read this, my 7-year-old came home with all these fun facts about Mount Everest. And then we start Googling and find out all these people who die and the markers that are there from trying to climb. And then you write about that and it's 20 below zero. And, I obviously sound very biased.
It did not get that cold.
Okay.
I deliberately went when it was warmest because I do not do cold weather.
I thought that it was that cold in that area when you were trying to go to the bathroom.
Oh yeah, that was cold.
Yeah, no, you wrote 20 degrees.
Yeah, and when we reached a certain elevation and you go to sleep in these plywood shacks that aren't insulated and you wake up the next morning and you're like, what happened to the window? And you look at the glass and there's a thick layer of ice on the inside from just the water vapor you exhaled sleeping overnight. That's a little bit of a reality check there. The trek to Everest was amazing. It was a spiritual exploration. It was a mental test. It was an exposure to an amazing culture and the meditative techniques that they've developed in that part of the world. And it was an endurance test, but also the rewards you get for going up there is scenery you will not see anyplace else on the planet. You get up to a certain height in the Himalayas and you look around and you're like, holy whatever. I am truly in the realm of the gods right now because it feels like that.
You describe it as like, I am literally on top of the world. And to be clear, you did not like you went to the top of where the non-climbers
exactly. There's climbing and there's trekking. Trekking is walking and you can trek to the base of Mount Everest. Further than that, you have to technically climb. That is not something anybody should do unless they have tremendous amount of technical climbing experience. And that is what gets people killed, is when they try to climb Everest or Chomolungma, as it's called in that part of the world in Tibetan. You should not try to climb Chomolungma if you do not have some real climbing experience. And some people, unfortunately, just pay a lot of money, don't have the experience, have Sherpas and guides who put their lives at risk to get them up there, and a lot of them die in the process. That's not what we were doing. We were just trekking, walking to the base, to the foot of the mountain. But boy, are you high up. It's, I think, 17,600 feet. And when you're walking on a flat surface, if you take your time, you're okay. The second you have to take even the slightest step up, and I'm pretty fit, and I'm gasping for breath. It was mind blowing. Yeah, it was quite an experience. But
and so when you got to that base and you looked around, what did you see? What did you experience?
A sense of accomplishment for one thing, a realization. It was more a mental, a rational realization that between me and outer space, there was nothing on the planet higher, that my feet were on the soil that was highest up towards everything of the rest of the universe beyond it. That was a startling realization. It was quite impressive, quite amazing. Yeah.
You write about your parents, and we go on this journey with you as your relationship has evolved with them. And at one point, you fully see them for who they are. Things that you didn't know as a child, questions that were answered, behavior. What was that experience like, writing and sharing and coming to your own, I guess, conclusions about them?
That was the hardest part to write. Understandably, I'm not a very confessional person. I don't handle emotions well.
You're a
I-
Vulcan.
I have spent my life trying to be a Vulcan, trying to keep those emotions under lock and key. And so, my editors very skillfully were trying to get me to open up and put more out there. And they got it out of me. So that was very hard, though. There was about a month's time where I was like, no, you're not getting any pages. This is a hard part. I don't want to deal with it. And then finally I dealt with it, but it was a lot of emotional stuff, particularly where I get to the part where, they start dying. My grandmother passed. I was very close to my grandmother, then my mom, and then my dad. And that was hard to write about, and still hard. I'm still reconciling with a lot of it, particularly around my mom, which is why I don't put a lot about her in the book, because I'm like, you know what, that's going to be on the side here. That's going to stay private because I'm still working through that. There's a lot more about my dad because we worked through our issues. And that was a really good thing that we did. And I was very glad that before he died, I was able to say to him, thank you for, you think of black authoritarian fathers. There we go. Got it. Authoritarian fathers, and you think, oh, that gay thing is gonna make this not good. He, despite his upbringing, his love for his family was so strong that he was able to work through all that and actually become one of my biggest advocates. And that was amazing. And I was able to thank him for that, for being an incredibly supportive parent, and for exposing me to the wild, which is where my love of birds comes from, is from him taking us camping and him making sure we got outdoors. And that, for me, that came through as the love of birds. And then when that love of birds started to develop, he made a point, even though he was a school teacher, and so he's up and dealing with these kids 5 days a week, and the weekend is his one time to sleep in and not deal with it. And he got his butt up every Sunday morning to take his bird crazy little son out to the South Shore Audubon Society bird walks on Sunday mornings. And I was so glad I was able to thank him for doing all that, before he died.
Your father was also an activist, and people in your family get arrested for disobedience and for standing up what they believe in. And as I was reading, there's this one time where you're arrested. It was, a protest for LGBTQ rights, and your father heard about it on the news. And when you get home, there's a message on your answer machine asking, were you there? Are you okay?
That was huge because I had come out to him, but I was really leery about talking about it because he was at the time so uncommunicative. And I was certain that this was something that he hated about me. And to come home after being arrested at that protest and get that message from him was the first time we had talked about anything about my gayness since I had told him several years earlier. And that he reached out about it, but more importantly, reached out about it in the context of protest, because he had gotten arrested at civil rights protests back in the day. And now it was this point of connection for us that, I had gotten arrested at a gay rights protest. And now, it was an echo of what he had done. And then there was a time we got arrested. There's a running family joke about how you're not a Cooper until you get arrested at a protest. But he and I got arrested together at a protest against police violence that had killed an African immigrant named Amadou Diallo, a very famous case here in New York. And so we were at a protest and we both got arrested together. And that was an amazing experience because in that jail cell, I saw my dad transform back into the man he must have been when he was in his 20s, fighting the good fight. And that jail cell was filled with these older African-American men who had all lived through it back in the day, and they were living through it again. And it was mind-blowing. They started to sing, actually. They all took up these spirituals and started to sing them. And I didn't know the words. So all I could do was sit there and listen to their voices resound through the station house. I can only imagine what the cops thought, hearing this powerful sound echo through that station house. It was amazing. It was an incredible experience.
As I'm reading this, I am in my head wondering, what would his dad think about the Central Park incident with Amy Cooper? And really, it was your sister who blew it up.
Yeah, no, it really was. I was like, oh, Facebook friends, look at this nonsense. And she was like, can I put this on Twitter? And, to me, Twitter is something you use, to send tweets about the rare bird that has shown up, if you use it at all. I'm a social media ignoramus. She, on the other hand, is plugged into Black Twitter. And boy, she put that thing on. And so, yeah, she's the one who blew it up. What would my dad think? My dad would be my dad would be cheering me on. He would be absolutely cheering me on. He would be mad also that I declined to participate in pursuing charges against her. He would be quite mad about that. And I get it. A lot of people were mad about that. A lot of Black people were mad about that. Part of me was mad.
I saw it on Twitter.
Yeah. And I get it. I understand it. It was a very hard call for me. It was right on the line for me as to which way to go about that. And ultimately, a sense of proportionality, a sense of mercy and justice, I guess, just forced me to tip onto the side of, you know what? This is the DA's call. It was never mine to make. He can decide to prosecute or not. And if he feels like he needs my participation, he can subpoena me and I will comply with that subpoena. But I don't know, I felt like there was definitely a bloodlust going on, and I could not I couldn't in good conscience, go buy into that whole sort of bloodlust. I mean, there were death threats against her, and it was too much. So
I understood your perspective. I heard about it in passing when it happened, but reading it, but I think African Americans in general can sometimes have contradictory or conflicting views about law enforcement, the criminal justice system. So, here you are protesting because of Amadou Diallo. And then here's this white woman threatening to call the police on you, you don't press charges. And then all of this comes about because dogs are running without a leash in a protected area of Central Park where they would endanger birds or upset the wildlife that's there. And then it becomes, well, we need more policing there. And, you write in there, like there was someone who was like, I don't know in this post George Floyd moment if we should be advocating for more police. And you're like, well, this is a white area. So who cares? But but we all know like policing can be meant for one group and then be taken out differently on another group.
Well, I have to admit, I nearly screamed at that moment when that person said that. They're like, oh yeah, because of George Floyd, I don't think this is the time to be asking for more police enforcement in the ramble on people who walk their dogs off the leash where they're not supposed to. Virtually every person in the zip codes around the ramble is white. So what he was saying was that his takeaway from George Floyd was that there should be less enforcement on white people. And I was like, but I didn't scream. I held my tongue. And Fortunately, that particular community board did not take the advice of that person, and they went on to say, yeah, we need some enforcement of the leash laws in this area of the park. So, but yeah, it got complicated. It got complicated in a lot of ways, in terms of the aftermath and the response. And so that was a little hard to navigate, but the part that was most difficult for me was that piece of it that was, do you participate in the attempts to prosecute? And it was a hard call. And yeah, that's all I'll say about it.
So I want to get through some of these questions quickly. Well, one, what is the air like in New York right now? And Laura wants to also know, is that causing distress for New York City birds?
That's a really great question. I don't know the answer. I've been looking at my birds locally, and I can't see any signs of distress, but that doesn't mean that there isn't any. The whole idea of, the metaphor, canary in a coal mine, well, that wasn't originally a metaphor. That was actually what happens, is people would take canaries into coal mines because they were more sensitive to the deadly fumes and would die first to warn miners that they needed to get the heck out of the mines. Well, we're kind of in that situation now. But even without the whole idea of, are the birds being directly affected by this particular smoke situation, we've got to recognize that the birds are our early warning system, that our environment is tipping towards collapse. And I say that because in my own lifetime, since I started birding as a kid, there are now 1/3 fewer birds in North America than there used to be. We have lost nearly 1/3 of our birds, of the population of birds in North America in my own lifetime. And I see it, I feel it. I meet some of the new birders, because we have a lot of new birders that came out of the pandemic, which is wonderful. But we have a nice day in Central Park, and they're like, oh my God, the birding today is incredible. And I look at them and I'm like, you have no idea what it used to be like. And that's gone. And it's so important, not just for the birds, but for us and for our own future. The birds are our canary in a coal mine. They are our early warning system. It is vitally important that we reverse this, not just stop the decline, but reverse it, bring the birds back, bring the habitats back, because if we do that, we are actually saving ourselves.
So Greer wants to know, one last quick question. Should we feed the birds?
That's a good question. Context matters. It's actually not a bad thing to feed birds, especially in the wintertime, from a bird feeder. You've got to make sure you keep that bird feeder clean so that you're not fostering disease that's actually going to harm the birds. You don't want that. The whole idea is to help the birds. So, but having a bird feeder outside your window that you keep clean and you stock with fresh seed, that can be great. It's not harming the birds, it's helping some of the birds, and it brings the birds to you. Now, why do I hem and haw a little bit? Because if you're in an urban environment, you want to be really careful about that. I don't feed birds. Why? Because my neighborhood is the rat epicenter of New York City. So, that seed that goes out there, some of the birds are not going to get all of it, and the rest is going to, help feed a rat population. So you want to be cautious about that in that respect. But no, it can be a wonderful thing to feed the birds, and bring them right up close to you.
Natalie, thank you for such a great interview of Christian. And Christian, I wish I could bottle that energy and spread it among every fan guest that we have. You bring so much to the screen and so much energy and education for people. You make it very accessible, and I can see obviously why Nat Geo tapped you. I can't wait to watch the series. I bet it's just going to be amazing. Maybe tell people very quickly a couple of the countries that you went to for the Nat Geo series.
Well, this season of the series, and we're hoping we'll get a second season. Please watch the show. But this first season was limited because of budget and COVID reasons to domestic, to the United States. But domestic includes Puerto Rico and Hawaii. So that was amazing to go to those places. But also, I mean, my favorite episode is Alabama. The Alabama episode where we went down and really the collision of civil rights history and personal family history, because my dad's side of the family's from Alabama, and birds. So yeah, that's hopefully we did that justice to that experience.
And hopefully season 2 will be in Chicago. You can go to Montrose.
That's right. You have to
That
come.
would be amazing. I'm also hoping, I don't know, New Zealand.
Clearly, we've only scratched the surface of Christian's knowledge about birding and a fascinating life, many more chapters as well about who and what you are. Natalie, thank you again. Also, I just want to say again, you've done such incredible work with FAN over the years. We're always so grateful every time you say yes. We really, really appreciate the devotion of time and energy that you put into every author that you host. It's always a pleasure to have you on the screen and to work with you. We make things very seamless, very easy. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
It's our pleasure. I'm going to ask 2 really quick questions here that were just quick little detail questions. Greer was asking, can you recommend a brand or type of binoculars?
No, because I've never bought any. Like I said, all my binoculars have been either hand-me-downs or gifts. Though I do hear people praise Monarchs, I think is the brand. So I hear people praise those as effective but economical.
Is there a particular aspect of binoculars that they should look for, a functionality that they should?
Magnification somewhere between 7.5 and 10.
Okay.
You may think that 10 going higher is better. It will make it bigger, but it also makes it less steady when you're trying to follow the bird. So you want to get somewhere between 7.5 and 10, depending on your stability.
Very good. And I think I have time for Lydia's question. I'll tuck in one more before 8 o'clock. We're at 7:59 right now. Lydia asks, is there an evolutionary reason why the males are the ones with the vibrant or interesting colors and plumage and the females are not?
Yes, because the females brood the eggs, so they have to be cryptically colored so that they blend in and don't give away their presence sitting on the nest.
Very good. And I think one last question, since you answered that so quickly, someone wants to know, are there any birds outside your window as we speak?
No, because it's already after dark here and it's raining. So no birds at the moment.
Okay, well, good. Well, thank you so much. Again, everyone, come to After Hours, come hang out with us again. Christian, your energy has been really good. I know you've been up a long time. We're hoping to get many minutes out of Christian in After Hours, but he does have a big day tomorrow. So just prepping people a little bit ahead of time. Thank you so much, everybody. Come. Thank you for an incredible season in Fanland. We're going to go off. We're going to start fast in the fall in mid-September. Lots already built up. So thank you so much for engaging with our programming.